Hey guys, tonight we settle down under a sky that's more painting than atmosphere, broad, honey gold sunlight brushing over olive green hills. The air warm enough to make the cicadas sound like they've been sipping coffee all morning. You're lying there in a patch of grass that smells faintly peppery, feeling the ground's gentle heat through your back. The Aegean is somewhere far off to your right, murmuring in its lazy, endless way, and every now and then a stray breeze arrives with the salty tang of seaweed. It's a perfect morning in mythic Greece, perfect enough to make you suspicious. Because perfection here usually means a god is about to make things weird. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not because anything especially dangerous is planned, no sea monsters, no sword fights, but because if you so much as lock eyes with the wrong immortal, you're suddenly in the middle of a 4-generation grudge match you didn't sign up for. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push yourself up, brushing olive leaves from your tunic, and start along a dirt path that curls through orchards heavy with fruit. The farmers here are mortal, sure, but they live in a state of low-grade paranoia, always glancing at clouds in case they're actually shape-shifting deities. Historians still argue whether most Greeks genuinely believed in these divine soap operas or treated them more like a cautionary Netflix series. Either way, the gossip flows especially about Hera, queen of the gods, whose moods could pivot from sunshine to hailstorm faster than a summer afternoon. Somewhere, just beyond the hills, Io is still human, still blissfully unaware that her life will soon involve hooves. For now, the day is all dust motes, slow steps, and the smell of figs ripening in the sun. You follow the winding path past a cluster of whitewashed homes, each with terracotta roofs that catch the sunlight like slices of burnt orange. Women lean over low stone walls, their arms dusted with flour from kneading bread, trading the kind of local gossip that's half fact, half wishful thinking. Today's hot topic, that Hera might be paying a visit to the countryside. Everyone pretends this is a good thing, but their voices drop at her name the way you'd lower your voice to talk about a boss who's prone to firing people on a whim. A mainstream fact, Hera, in the myths, was the goddess of marriage and family yes, but also famous for guarding her territory with the same intensity you guard the last slice of cake at a party. Her husband, Zeus, had a well-documented inability to keep his divine attentions focused. This is where things start to get quirky. Hera's method of managing these situations often involved the kind of transformations that would land you in a very specific veterinary case file. Today's unlucky name in the rumor mill. Io historians still argue whether Io was a mortal, priestess of Hera, or a minor goddess herself. Either way, everyone agrees she caught Zeus's wandering eye, and that alone is basically a death sentence for peace and normalcy. You pass an olive press, where men in tunics lean on wooden levers, their shoulders straining as they crush fruit into a pale green stream. They don't even pause to wave at her to focus on their work, or unwilling to risk attracting attention while Hera might be in earshot. Even the sheep seem quieter than usual, their bells muffled, as if the whole village has decided to keep its head down. Somewhere behind those orchard-covered hills, you can almost imagine Hera herself, tall, regal, gold diadem catching the sun, watching the village with a faintly amused smile, already deciding which mortal's life she's about to turn inside out. You edge your way toward the outskirts of the village, where the land dips into a wide meadow stitched with poppies and long swaying grass. The breeze carries the smell of thyme and wild honey, and you hear the distant creak of an ox cart. Somewhere, to your left, a shepherd whistles to his flock in a tune that sounds suspiciously like he's making it up as he goes along. It's the kind of place that should feel safe except for the way everyone keeps glancing at the sky. Mainstream fact time. In Greek myth, the gods had a very casual relationship with personal boundaries. They would stroll into mortal affairs literally without warning, and while Zeus was infamous for this, Hera was equally famous for the aftercare. Not the warm blanket and cup of tea sort, but the I will rearrange your entire existence to make a point sort. And then there's the quirky tidbit scholars still love to discuss. Cows. Hera had a particular fondness for them, not necessarily as sacred animals, that's more of an Egyptian thing, but as a sort of calling card in her punishments. Which brings us back to Io, who, according to the more widely accepted version of the story, was transformed into a sleek white heifer. Why? To hide her from Hera. If you asked Zeus, to keep her under control. If you asked Hera, historians still argue whether Hera actually initiated the transformation or simply accepted the outcome and made it permanent. Either way, Io's mornings were about to get a lot more grass-based. As you crest a low hill, you spot a lone figure near the stream. Even from here, you can tell it's Io still in human form, for the moment dipping her hands into the water and watching her reflection like she's trying to memorize it. There's a stillness in her shoulders, the kind that says she knows something is coming. And in the air above the meadow, a cloud begins to form, small, perfectly round, and suspiciously stationary. You don't need to be a mythologist to know this is not a normal weather pattern. The cloud doesn't drift. It hangs in the air like an idea someone forgot to finish, edges glowing faintly in the afternoon sun. You keep your steps soft, almost embarrassed to interrupt whatever moment this is, but Io turns her head anyway. Her gaze lands on you, sharp and questioning, as if she's trying to decide whether you're friend, foe, or just another random mortal who's wandered into divine drama by accident. There's a thin ribbon of water trickling from the stream, down toward her bare feet. She steps into it, and you notice the way her toes press into the mud, steadying her. Mainstream fact: in ancient Greece, streams and springs weren't just scenic features, they were sacred spaces. Many were tied to nymphs or minor deities, and stepping into one was a way of aligning yourself with their protection. It's possible Io was hedging her bets. A quirky detail you probably didn't expect: some vase paintings depict Io wearing a delicate necklace even after she's transformed into a cow. Historians still argue whether that's artistic license, a way to help viewers recognize her, or an odd suggestion that divine transformations might not affect personal accessories. The thought of Hera turning someone into livestock but politely leaving the jewelry in place feels absurdly on brand. The stillness breaks when a low hum begins to seep from the cloud above. It's almost imperceptible at first, more vibration than sound, but it draws your attention upward. The cloud swells, the edges sharpening as if sculpted by unseen hands. Io's eyes widened on in terror, exactly, but with the resignation of someone who's been dreading a moment for far too long. And here's the scholarly debate. Some versions say Zeus sent the cloud as a hiding place, wrapping her in mist to conceal her from Hera's gaze. Others suggest Hera herself descended within it, using the disguise to get close without announcing her arrival. Either way, the meadow suddenly feels smaller, like the air itself has been drawn tight. You glance toward the shepherd on the ridge, but he's already herding his flock in the opposite direction. Wise move. The cloud doesn't just loom, it rolls toward you like a slow, deliberate wave, soft at the edges but somehow carrying weight. You can taste the damp in the air now, a faint metallic temps. The way the sky smells right before rain decides to ruin everyone's laundry. Io takes one step back, and that's all it takes for the cloud to break open. From within, the figure emerges not all at once, but piece by piece, like someone stepping through a curtain they don't quite trust. At first you see only the outline of a robe, the hem whispering over the grass without bending a single blade. Then a hand, pale and perfectly still, as if carved from marble. Finally, the face, Hera's face. Mainstream historical fact: in Greek art, Hera is often depicted wearing a Stephana high, crown-like diadem signifying both her role as queen of the gods and her, let's call it, unshakable sense of entitlement. It's there, now, gleaming faintly even under the cloud's shadow. Quirky tidbit: there are some ancient comic plays where Hera's jealousy over Zeus's affairs is exaggerated into slapstick. She stomps, shouts, or sends absurd punishments like itchy blankets or swarms of geese. But here, in this meadow, there's no comedy, just that quiet, calculating look she's giving Io, the kind of look that could strip paint off a temple wall. Historians still argue whether Hera's decision to turn Io into a cow was spontaneous, spite, or part of a much longer, more symbolic punishment, something tied to older fertility rites, where sacred cattle played a role. Either way, Hera steps closer now, and you feel an almost imperceptible pressure in your chest, as if the air is bowing to her presence. Io doesn't run. Maybe she knows it's pointless. Maybe she's frozen. Hera lifts one hand and traces a circle in the air, her fingertip glowing faintly. The grass beneath Io's feet ripples, bending outward, as though caught in a silent wind. You notice her shadow shifting, elongating, warping until the shape no longer belongs to a woman at all. Somewhere in the distance, a cow bellows, not here, not yet, but soon. The sound comes again, low, mournful, and oddly resonant, as if it's echoing up from beneath the ground rather than drifting across the meadow. You glance around for the animal making it, but the space remains stubbornly empty, save for Hera and Io, who now sways slightly on her feet. The change begins at the edges. Io's fingers twitch, then stiffen, her nails darkening into the smooth, blunt keratin of hooves. Her spine arches, shoulders narrowing while her torso lengthens, a subtle, yet relentless rearranging of bone and sinew, the kind of transformation that Greek poets could describe with 10 ornate adjectives in a single line, but which in real life, or whatever passes for real in a myth, looks both miraculous and deeply unsettling. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek culture had a long tradition of metamorphosis, tales humans becoming animals, trees, or even constellations, often as acts of divine punishment or escape. Ovid's Metamorphoses catalogues dozens, but Io's story remained one of the most retold, partly because of Hera's unflinching pettiness, quirky tidbit, and some rare vase paintings. Io is depicted mid-transformation, with a cow's head but still wearing a peplus, the folds of cloth draping absurdly over her bovine shoulders, as if the artist couldn't quite decide whether to commit fully to the joke. It's a reminder that, to the Greeks, even tragedy could carry a faint whiff of comedy. Historians still argue whether Hera intended the transformation as a permanent fate, or merely a temporary measure to keep Io safe from Zeus. In this case, meaning impossible to recognize and harder to seduce. Theories diverge wildly, some linking it to symbolic acts of ownership, others to older herding rituals where women and cattle shared certain ceremonial roles. Io lets out a sharp, startled bellow, her voice now entirely that of a cow. The meadows, birds fall silent. Hera steps back, satisfied, and the faintest smile tugs at the corner of her mouth. Not joy, more like the satisfaction of a chess player watching their opponent's queen tip over. The cloud around her begins to fade, curling back into the sky as if drawn upward by invisible hands. And just like that, she's gone, leaving only the transformed Io standing in the damp grass, wide-eyed in her new shape. Somewhere far above, you hear the faintest roll of thunder. Zeus, perhaps, finally realizing he's late to his own drama. The thunder lingers, grumbling like an old man who's been left out of the joke. You stand there, watching Io, now entirely cow, shift uneasily from hoof to hoof. Her large, liquid eyes dart around, trying to make sense of the meadow that only moments ago had been an ordinary place. You can almost feel her frustration, the strange dissonance between human thought and animal body. A dragonfly zips past her ear, and she flinches so hard she nearly topples sideways. This is the part no bard ever bothers to mention, the awkward, ungainly adjustment period. Being turned into a cow sounds dramatic, yes, but it's also inconvenient. Imagine trying to swat a mosquito without hands. Mainstream historical factor. Transformation marked just the first step in a long and rather miserable chapter. According to the myth's more popular versions, Hera wasn't content to simply leave her as a cow. She also assigned the 100-eyed giant Argus Panops to guard her. Argus's job was not just security, but surveillance in its purest form, an ancient eyeball-laden CCTV system. Quirky tidbit. Some sources claim Hera gifted Io with a particularly glossy coat, so she would always appear beautiful, even in bovine form. The idea of divine aesthetics applied to barn animals feels absurdly on brand for the gods, who never seem to draw a line between glamour and cruelty. Historians still argue whether Argus's role was punishment for Io, or for Zeus, way to taunt the king of gods by keeping his love interest constantly in view, but entirely out of reach. Either way, Hera's attention to detail was impressive. Io takes a tentative step toward the edge of the meadow, the grass whispering beneath her hooves. The sun is bright, and the air hums with the kind of stillness that always precedes trouble. You notice the shadow first long, strange, and fragmented, as though cast by something with far too many limbs. Then, a slow movement in the distance. Argus emerges from behind a copse of olive trees. His body is human enough, but each movement catches the light on yet another gleaming, watchful eye on his forehead, his cheeks, even the backs of his hands. They blink independently, giving him the disconcerting air of someone perpetually awake, perpetually aware. Io freezes. You do too, though for different reasons. Something about that many eyes looking in your direction makes you very aware of every wrinkle in your clothes, every awkward fidget. Argus smiles slow, deliberate, and utterly unhurried and begins walking toward the meadow. Argus doesn't walk like a man in a hurry. He strolls, as though there's nothing urgent about corralling a magically transformed nymph, and nothing odd about his body being a living constellation of eyes. The wind picks up just slightly, rippling the grass, and you notice how the extra eyes seem to blink in rhythm with the breeze. A soft, almost hypnotic flutter. Io steps backward, her hooves pressing into the damp earth with little sucking sounds. She's clearly not keen on the idea of getting closer to this walking surveillance tower. You can't blame her if you've ever been stared at by one person. It's uncomfortable. Multiply that by 100, and you've got something approaching cosmic paranoia. Mainstream. Historical fact. Targus Panoptes' 100 eyes was said to never all sleep at the same time. In most versions of the myth, half of them rested while the other half remained open, giving him a perpetual state of alertness that made him an ideal guard. The ancient Greeks valued vigilance almost as much as they valued beauty, and Argus was, in a way, the physical embodiment of both, depending on your tolerance for a slightly nightmare-inducing appearance. Quirky tidbit. One obscure fragment claims Argus occasionally used his spare eyes for things like watching sheep, scanning the horizon for storms, and keeping tabs on who was watering their fields on time. Essentially, he was the nosiest neighbor in the ancient world. Except he didn't need to peek over the fence. He could just swivel his shoulder and have an entirely new perspective. Historians still argue whether the 100 eyes were meant literally or metaphorically. Some believe the number symbolized omnipresence, while others argue it was a poetic flourish meant to indicate a lot rather than exactly 100. Either way, if you were Io, the distinction probably wouldn't make you feel any better. Argus reaches the meadow's edge and stops. He doesn't speak at first, just tilts his head slightly, scanning Io from every possible angle at once. One eye on his temple winks, though whether it's meant as a gesture of friendliness or a subtle warning is anyone's guess. Then he finally says, in a voice that's surprisingly soft, "You'll come with me now." Io snorts a sound halfway between indignation and panic and bolts. You watch her gallop toward the open fields, her glossy coat catching the sunlight, the sound of pounding hooves mixing with the sharp hiss of wind. Argus doesn't run after her immediately. Instead, his eyes rotate, some focusing on her fleeing form, others glancing in your direction, as if silently noting that he knows you're here to dart. And then, with a speed that belies his calm demeanor, he starts after her. His stride is longer than you expect, and though he doesn't seem to exert much effort, the distance between them begins to shrink. You can feel the tension in the air tighten like a drawn bowstring.